Well, I started as a careers teacher in 1977. Basically, I was all of 24. I was tapped on the shoulder because the person who'd sort of been looking after it was going on family leave. And the boss sort of tapped me on the shoulder. Are you interested in looking after the careers area? In those days, it was 1 or 2 periods, you know, and basically there was a set of shelves in the library that had university handbooks and some of that stuff. And you'd look after that and
put the posters up.
Yeah, and get the mail and oversee or be responsible for talking to the kids about VTAC applications and what comes after school and those sorts of things. But it was very, very limited in a sense. And basically it was much about getting VTAC forms filled out towards the end of the year and talking about subject selection.
Sort of similar for me, except I was in a tech school at that stage, and so VTAC was an unknown quantity for most students. Apprenticeships and traineeships were much more the thing, and the big issues there were the big organisations like the Board of Works, Gas and Fuel, SEC, and their big apprenticeship programs. They were the ones that you really did the big promotion on and really got kids. Would sit down with kids and help them do their applications and those sorts of things. So a relatively small number went on to tertiary education, and usually that was through what we now call TAFE, but was they would go to places like Preston Tech and so forth. So it was a very different sort of cohort of students. So it was really only when I went to Braemar that I suddenly had to learn all the VTAC stuff. Yes.
Well, I think the big change really was a missive came out from TJ Ford, who was secretary of the department or something.
Yes.
In 1978. Now I happened to be travelling overseas that year, and that designated that there needed to be a designated careers teacher within the school, and they had a significant time release, not quite full time, but virtually full time, and so you actually got an added member of staff. You got an extra supernumerary, so you could appoint a careers teacher. So when I returned from overseas in '79, I was suddenly a careers teacher with a substantial time allowance, and work experience was just taking off. I think there was a big work experience conference either that year or in '77, and there'd been a few trials like Faulkner were involved in, and my school did it for the first time in '79. So that gave another focus with work experience. And also you could be seen to be doing something with this time allowance. Everyone's looking at you. How can you just, some people didn't
all these
know
forms to fill in.
Some people had turned up in '78 and suddenly I returned and, who's this person? He's a careers teacher. What's, and a foreign body. And we did the 4-week training course. I did it a year after Frank, and that was great. It was, by that stage, it was in at Queensbury Street.
That's right.
And there was a pub nearby, and that was particularly on a Friday afternoon, not much got done. But it was very good. It was run by, not only Betty Lever, but Donald Murdoch and, I forget her name, but people who had already some experience, like Margaret Bride, would come in and do sort of guest appearances and tell you what was it like being in a school with some experience. So you learned a lot, and you met people, which was very important.
Field trips too, I seem to recall, went to places like Telecom, as it was, or PMG's department probably was called in those days, and they talked about all the job opportunities in their organisation and that sort of thing.
And the CAV was sort of formed in, I think Donald formed it in '76. Donald Murdoch was the first president, and he was in curriculum branch in Queensbury Street, and he and Betty sort of Betty Levy got it going. And so I joined, I think probably in '79. The school might have been a member prior to that, but I sort of became involved a bit through the Moorabbin Careers Group, which basically we had a meeting. I was elected president. David Osborne was involved because he was at Huntingdale at that stage.
Huntingdale Tech, I think.
Yeah, Huntingdale Tech. So we had a little active organisation, and then the CAV decided that maybe they needed to involve the regional groups, so they got representation from the regional groups, and I was the nominated person from Moorabbin. So I joined the committee in 1980, and we used to meet at VCAD in St Kilda Road, the precursor to VTAC, I suppose. I don't know what it was. Was it VCAD?
It was probably the precursor of the VCA.
Yeah, it was in St Kilda Road. Anyway, so we had meetings there sort of monthly, and so you got to know a few people, and then in my case, the critical year became 1983, because in 1983, Margaret Bride, who was president, was promoted um, from curriculum branch back into a school, Walden North, I think it was. And so suddenly she wasn't available to be president in the forthcoming year. So they sort of looked at me and said, well, Graeme, you're in a relatively small school. I was teaching in East Bentley at a school called Morley High, which no longer exists, thanks to Jeff Kennett at me. You know, I had about 40 or 50 kids in Year 12, so it wasn't a very big school, 350, 400 kids. Moorabbin Oakley, essentially, Morley. So they looked at me and said, well, you know, maybe you can do it? Really? So I became president of this organisation, which was only small. You know, production of a newsletter happened on a Gestetner, you know, curriculum branch, where you'd reeled off, you know, 150 copies or something that gradually got fainter and fainter and got sent out. Everything was done by mail. We had a post office box in the city, and the secretary at the time was Adrian Cameron, and Adrian accessed the box more often than I could because he was in Hoppers Crossing, but he had to come into the city a bit, so he would access the post office box. He'd ring me, we'd talk about things, we'd hold meetings, but it was just, you know, it was a very small organisation. And in 1983, I hand wrote an application for professional development funding because the Blackburn report on post-compulsory schooling came out, and got the school to type it up. It would have been on one of those wax. So I had a copy and we could send one in, and lo and behold, we got money. And I can't remember the quanta, but it was about 12 or 15,000, which in today's lot isn't that much, but it was a lot back then. So we booked Erskine House for 3 days. When I say we, I did. And, you know, sent out mail to all the careers teachers. Hey, we've got a conference, and come to Erskine House. And we got about, did you go to that one?
I think I did go to that one, yes.
Yeah, 100 or so.
Yep.
Somewhere in the files at home, I've probably got a list of who came, and organised speakers and, you know, catering and all that sort of stuff. It was a massive headache, but it happened and it was great. So in 1986, we held another conference again at Erskine House, which was conveniently timed to fit in with the arrival of Halley's Comet, which was built up hugely. And I remember my father always wanted to live from one to the next, and he was born in 1913. The previous one came in 1912, so he missed that, and he died 6 months or a few months before the next one came, so he missed the 1986 one. But we were there for that, and we'd lay on the beach and watched it, if you could see it, the little fuzzy blob up there. But it was just that was a very, very, well, they were both good conferences, and it sort of led to the sort of every 2-year conferences that I think largely continued.
Yeah, and the enormous amount of work went into, and obviously still does, goes into planning those conferences. There would be at least a year out from the conference, the committee would sort of be discussing it broadly, and then usually a subcommittee of the committee would be formed to do the planning, to contact potential guest speakers, to look at venues. So there was an enormous amount of work went into that, but they were always very well attended, and I think highly appreciated by those who came. Nearly always right at the end of the year, just in that little gap between when the students had gone and when the VCE results came out, and it all got hectic again. So it was a time when careers people could make some time to gather. Yeah.
And I think just even the residential nature, particularly
Yes.
the early ones, was particularly important in terms of getting people together in a social environment as well as a learning environment, and you know, a lot of friendships and collegiality developed as a result. And I think you've talked about the careers groups before. I think the careers groups underpinned all that and supported and helped with all the things that went on. But when I think back to the organisation of the early conferences, you know, we didn't have computers and internet and those sorts of things. So it was all done by mail and promoted by the newsletter and word of mouth. I think back, I think, how on earth did we do it? But we managed to do it.
And the local careers groups were very important, particularly when they were out in the regional centres. Right. So you know, like the Bendigo Careers Group or the Ballarat Careers Group or Geelong or Shepparton or whatever, they were integrally involved in the planning and the delivery of those conferences in those regional centres.
And people putting themselves forward to run sessions and highlight what they're doing in their own school, and the department in time became significant too in assisting, providing people and some money and.
And I think the move of Leela from being our executive officer into a significant role in the department was very advantageous to our organisation.
It's probably worth, from a historical viewpoint, talking about executive officers, as they were then called. In 1983, when I became president, I decided we couldn't continue to work out of a post office box. So I convinced the committee that we needed to spend some money to make some money. And coincidentally, I'd sort of met and got to know through Joint Council of Subject Associations Mike Sherry and Mike Rowland of the VCTA, and they were building a new premises in Collingwood. And a lot of careers teachers had a commercial background, that came from the commerce area, and they could see a marketing opportunity for publications. Careers teachers will buy them. And so we established a relationship, and they said, well, look, we can have a room in our new building for a peppercorn lease. I don't know if we paid much at all. And we employed a careers teacher on family leave. Ray Jamison was the first to be the executive officer. In other words, to have someone office staff who could receive mail and keep things flowing. And then that was followed by the likes of Amanda Elwood and ultimately Leela. And they were huge in getting things organised, even though we'd still gather in at Hotham Street in Collingwood with the VCTA officers to send out how often did we do the journal or the newsletter? Sort of
3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah, about 4 times a year, certainly once every term at least. And so we'd gather there and stuff it in envelopes and lick stamps and carry it down to the post office box and send it off.
Same with conferences.
So, and
enormous table in the middle with about all the different handouts that were going to be in the show bag.
Yeah, that's right.
And everybody walked around the table. We probably still do it. And sort of stuffing bags as you go. Yes.
So but it was the committee members who were doing all that, and the executive officers played a big role. One of my vivid memories is holding meetings in at Hotham Street, and by that stage I was just on the committee and not chairing the meetings. But Leela or Amanda, or I can't remember Ray ever bringing her child in, but I remember Leela and Amanda Elwood both breastfeeding while we're holding meetings, and the baby's gurgling in the corner. And then we'd go downstairs and stuff envelopes, whatever it would be. So it's a very primitive operation. It was all pre-computers, of course. So it was fun times.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's essential because, as was mentioned earlier, you're largely on your own as a careers teacher in a school. And I think there's huge benefit by communicating across schools and sharing across schools. So regional groups have been huge in achieving that, and I think the CEAV in sort of overseeing it in a sense and providing a whole lot of support and information and training. I think it's essential. In the late 80s, prior to Mr. Kennett doing things, we had school support centres, and I in Southern Region, Max Marrow in sort of Peninsula, sort of that end of things, Ruth Chapman in Eastern, David Osborne, I'm trying to think who else was. There are a number of us who was released from school into school support centres, and we became the curriculum consultant in careers. And we ran the training sessions for first year careers teachers. Well, the early ones were at Dookie, which was a nice smelly place, but very good to get peaches. They were great times too, and I think a lot of people became involved after those training sessions because they could see the benefit of meeting other people, finding out what they're doing in other schools, and liaising. They were good events, and ultimately, those have changed over time as to when they're run and where they're run, and now they're all run here, I assume.
No, I certainly think they encourage anybody who's new to the to the profession, to cultivate those friendships and those relationships with other schools, and of course with the formal organisations, the local careers group and ACE, because they are an incredible source of support, and the opportunity to just talk to a colleague who's facing the same sorts of issues you are is really terrific. I mean, it's interesting, having been in an APS school where there's a lot of competition between schools. There's no competition between careers advisors. No. It's very much a cooperative process, and I think that the ability to just ring someone up and say, look, have you dealt with this organisation, or have you had to complete this sort of application on behalf of any of your students, just to get some feedback from a colleague who's dealing with similar situations is incredibly valuable. And if you don't know anyone in particular, well, then obviously you come here, you come to ACE, and they'll direct you to someone who can give you that help and that advice.
Well, yeah, Richmond, it was interesting. At the time, I was working in the School Support Centre in Paran, and I was chairperson of Joint Councils of Subject Associations for a few years as the CAV rep. And we had CAV had a conference down at Deakin in Geelong. And Barry Pullen was the minister, who was a very boring person, but he had a physics background, and because I had a science background, it was decided that, mate, Graeme, maybe you should sit next to Barry. So we had a bit of a boring time together. But being the minister and me being me, I decided to lobby him on behalf of subject associations to say, well, look, Barry, there are a number of schools are being closed. Now, schools would be an ideal setup to put subject associations. And I was actually trying to get access to Chadstone, because I lived in Mount Waverley. And I thought, well, it's right next to the shopping centre and sort of at the end of the freeway. If you came off at Warrigal Road, which is probably what you could do at those days. And so I lobbied very hard with Jim Wilson, who was in the department, to get access to Chadstone. But the department, being the department, wouldn't give us access to Chadstone High. They said, look, you can have Richmond. Richmond Tech was also closing. And it wasn't ideal, and it was in a big brick edifice. And but we decided, well, something's better than nothing. So we got access to Richmond for subject associations. So a number of associations, including the BCTA and us and Maths and Science and a number of others, I think, went in there. And it was good because you could share some office sort of facilities, and you could have a bit of cross-fertilisation. And so we moved to Richmond until, I don't know when that disappeared, but it basically it was heritage listed and wasn't meant to be demolished, but somehow got demolished eventually. And then I think we went to
Carlton.
To Carlton. And then after that, I was out of it for a bit because I had to go back to a school and become a curriculum coordinator, and didn't get back into careers until early 2000s. So I was out of it for about 10 years.
Yeah, so Carlton, we've gradually got slightly bigger premises at Carlton. We started off with just the one office, and we managed to go across the corridor and grab that one as well. But then from there, it was to move to Burwood Road and Hawthorn, which gave us more office space, more training space. So that was a big improvement. And then, of course, the opportunity came up with the reopening of this campus here in Greensborough, and a very advantageous deal. So the rest is history, I guess.
Well, when I started, there were a number of important people, I suppose. Like Margaret Bride was heavily involved as president and a very active member and a supporter in the department prior to Leela going there, which I avoided because I didn't want to drive into the city. But although curriculum coordination in Wellington High School, Wellington Secondary College, wasn't the greatest job necessarily, but it was fine. But there was
Ruth.
David Osborne was in there.
Ruth Chapman.
Ruth Chapman, Neville Byron, Merrick Hilton, who was came all the way up from the Latrobe Valley. Gerard Torpey was another significant person. And Gerard wasn't working so much in a school, but I forget what his role was, but he was a very good committee member.
He was in Caulfield for quite a long time.
Yeah, he was at Caulfield, but then he had some other role.
He did, that's right.
And this is all prior to organisations like TAFEs and what have you. But I think the person who really got things changed as an executive officer was probably Linda Barron.
Yeah.
Yes. Things grew a lot when Linda was involved.
Yep. And we were limited in staff, of course, at the time, and one of it meant that a lot of Linda's time was taken up with just responding to people's inquiries on the telephone. Didn't give a lot of time for outreach, other than obviously the conferences and the new careers teachers conferences. So once we managed to get a few more staff on board,
once you had people, training officers or whatever you call them, that changed the organisation completely.
Yeah.
And there'd been a huge change between me finishing, when Kennett came in, that was 92. So I was back in a school and sort of out of careers for a good 10 years. And when I came back in, it was completely changed organisation. It was starting to do the training and bigger premises and more staff. I didn't go back on committee, but I appreciated everything that was being done.
And then Bernadette took on the role of executive officer. Well, she was president whilst Linda was CEO, was executive officer. But then later on, Bernadette took on the CEO role, and she really expanded the role of the organisation.
She moved more into the training.
Yes, and actively seeking government funding for programs and that sort of thing. That was a big part of it. And making links with corporate organisations, realising that poor school-based careers advisors and their schools can't provide all the funding to really make an organisation like this
and also
effective.
It assisted hugely that we had Lila in town, sort of arguing our case all the time, and you'd get even when I was careers teacher, you'd get contact from news organisations because they'd say, oh, blame the careers teachers, but if they weren't getting enough apprentices or whatever, and so you'd get these contacts and you'd be interviewed and your name would appear in the paper and you think, oh, I did actually say that, but where's the context around it?
Yes.
I feel for those people who are in the news and get quoted and it's nowhere near what they were saying. But it happened each year when results had come out or whatever might occur. That part of careers teachers' perspective. I'm sure it probably happened to you, Frank.
Yes, and as you say, you had to be very careful what you said because you might 10% of what you said might be reported.
That much, yes. One of the big changes for careers teachers has been getting access to technology and computers, and that's changed the role hugely. And I can remember when I was working in the School Support Centre, I ran a few workshops called AppleWorks for careers teachers, because I was one of the first, I think, to sort of computerise my work experience. I was into computers from very early on and was keen to sort of save all the handwriting and stuff. So I was word processing and using databases. Now, most people didn't know what a database was or that you could use it, to send out form letters and all this sort of stuff. So I can remember running a few sessions that were very popular about, using these little computers that were all, a few megabytes if they were lucky, to manage your work experience and to manage communication with parents and keep data and records of whatever you're doing. So it was a big change, and that was late 80s. So it's all still very recent. And then the internet comes along in the early 2000s, and that's just changed the ball game completely. So technology's played a big role, I think, in changing the interface.
People bringing out programs in the early days like Work Expo, for instance, which enabled you to put all of that stuff which previously had to do by hand. You would print out the documents, and Graeme Merrick, who brought out Course Search, that a lot of schools used that before there was sort of more regular access to a lot of that IT stuff. So, yeah, I think a lot of careers people did realise the importance of technology and push pretty hard to get the resources in their schools.
And because I mean, the idea of these vocational tools is, whether it be Moresby or Career Voyage or SDS and so forth. Sometimes parents would say, "Oh, well, can't you just test them and tell them what they're going to do?" And you have to explain that it was a little more complex than that. And that things like those programs can explore some issues with the student, can come up with some suggestions, but unless those students are then going to explore those suggestions and think about how it might suit them and so forth, well, it's not a magic bullet, is really, I guess, what I'm saying. It's a tool. And I used to say to careers teachers too, perhaps saying, "Oh, I don't know what, I don't want to be replaced by a test." I said, "Well, the good programs don't replace you; they make you more valuable, because they make the students see how they need to interact with you as
it gives you something to work with. Yeah,
to work on. What do you think about those suggestions? Does it make sense to you? I mean, if the ones that interest you, how do you think we can explore those a bit further? That you use them as a conversation starter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think they're valuable, but they're not a replacement for careers advice. It's pretty silly if I thought they were.
I think that's it. Thank you very much. I think we've got the cameras open.
We're all overthinking.